Well, as we talk about the weather in different facets, whether what you're going to see walking out the door and traveling, one aspect of the weather while traveling that you may not think about is the airline industry. And since Detroit is one of the many hubs for Delta Airlines, let's talk a little bit about what goes into the weather getting you from point A to point B. And we've got a unique opportunity here to talk to someone that has a lot of expertise in this, much like I do, telling you going out the door. Joining me now is Warren Weston. He's one of the meteorologists at Delta Airlines corporate offices down in Atlanta. Warren, thanks so much for joining us today. We really appreciate it.
Of course. Thank you, Brian. Happy to be here.
So let's get right into it here. A lot of people really don't know what goes into getting them from point A to point B. All they know is we get to the airport, we check in, we board the plane, and we go. And obviously, the weather has a big impact on the airline industry. And Delta's in a unique position in quite a few reasons. So, first off, tell me what you guys do at the corporate headquarters in Atlanta to keep the operation moving from a weather perspective.
Yeah. So our group is, as you mentioned, located here in our Operations and Customer Center in Atlanta at our headquarters offices. And we have 25 meteorologists that work around the clock, night and day, every day of the year. We have two focuses in our group. The first focus is on the surface side, where we're keeping an eye on our hub airports like Detroit, like New York and Atlanta. And on the other side of our operations, we've got an upper air group, and those meteorologists are putting out specific turbulence forecasts and working with our flight planners and our flight crew to make sure that we are operating safely and efficiently through our en route process.
So let's start with the surface desk. Since you said you've got the two divisions, I'm assuming that is what we would see, obviously, at the surface that impacts the taking off of the airlines and the airjet or the airplanes and the landing. Correct?
Right. That is right. So we have procedures. Yeah, we write special forecasts for operational use. And some of that is taken into account for the planning stages that affect takeoff and landings, like you said.
So give me a little bit more about what you guys do with the surface desk that impacts the operation as a whole going in every day. Because obviously, we've got severe weather, which kind of dealing with a lot right now, but then the winter storms too. I remember last year, the big winter storm we had right before Christmas, because I was traveling from Detroit to Amsterdam for the holiday. And that was just a little bit of a mess. Thank Lord the international flights are going out. So you guys do a lot every day to keep the air, at least Delta's jets, moving in and out of all the hubs, correct?
We do. So we start our day by giving a pretty large briefing here in our operations center. That's for groups associated not just in here, but with station managers. Everybody that's in Detroit also has access to this call, and we'll talk about looking out for the next 5 days. Maybe on day 2 or day 3, we will notice a storm system that we think could be impactful. At that point, we start a special forecast for our operations decision makers, and it's looking at every hour during that projected period of like a snowstorm event. And it actually puts a storm, sorry, I just forgot that. It actually puts an event category on each storm. So they'll take that event category A or B or C, and they'll use that event category to say, okay, we might have this type of de-icing operations. Will we be able to de-ice this many airplanes per hour? Will we need extra staffing to come in and help with that de-icing process? Is there going to be extra staffing needed for any other area of the operation? So we're helping in that regard. But then from an operational perspective, we're also putting out a forecast that looks at the visibility, the cloud height, and it puts everything into a category so that the flight planners know if we're flying an airplane into Detroit or out of Detroit today, we might need to carry additional fuel for an alternate airport because of the weather conditions forecast. So there's a lot of different ways in which our forecasts are used.
And you guys are essentially looking at some of the same data that I would use doing a forecast on television or the National Weather Service would use to do their forecast, correct?
We do. We look at a lot of the model available data that's available to you and I. We're just using it to kind of tailor it down into a specific package specifically for airline operations.
So we go from the surface to getting the planes in and out, now to the upper air, which, I look at as a meteorologist for TV behind the scenes, but I don't talk a lot about. For you guys, that's an integral part of the operation as well, because your jets are flying at 30, 35,000 feet. Tell me a little bit about what you guys do at the upper air desk. I'm really kind of interested in this part of it.
Yeah, so the first thing that we're looking out for, we're looking for any upper air hazards, and the most typical one that we see is turbulence. So we're actually looking at upper air patterns and seeing where there's any irregular movements at flight level, and we issue special forecasts for turbulence, and then our flight planners or the dispatchers, they use those forecasts to plan their flights, and so they're looking several hours out in advance. Maybe they're planning a flight from Detroit to Paris and out over the actual tracks across the Atlantic Ocean. It's kind of like there's highways in the sky across the ocean. We are able to use that forecast to direct them to what might be the best track or the best route for that flight coming up that evening. So the other things that we look at are thunderstorms, volcanic activity. There's constantly volcanoes going off around the different parts of the world, even though they might not be newsworthy. They're not having huge eruptions up to 50,000 feet, but they are still active. And it's still something that our flight crews need to be aware of because we definitely want to keep our aircraft out of volcanic ash. So that's another aspect of it. But our primary focus is typically turbulence for safety purposes. We want to keep our customers and our flight crews safe and comfortable, but we also want to keep the airplane protected as well. We don't like severe turbulence because aside from creating injuries or other problems, that airplane has to come off the line and then be completely re-inspected before it can operate again. So there's a lot to turbulence, but we definitely are focused on keeping our flights safe and in the smoothest air as possible.
So give me just an idea of what an 8-hour shift for a meteorologist at Delta Airlines would be like. Obviously, it's different from what I would do, giving the forecast on TV, and from what the National Weather Service, you've been telling. It's a little tailored to keep the operation moving. But tell me what a day in the life of an airline meteorologist looks like.
Yeah, so it's a little bit dependent on whether you're working upper air or surface, but in general, the main thing is you give a lot of briefings, both verbal, maybe on video, and you also do some face-to-face with people that are inside of the operations center. And then we're constantly really in two phases. We're in a planning phase where we're working on the forecast for 6 hours out, 12 hours out, 24 hours out. But at the same time that we're doing that, we have to also keep an eye on the current flights that are actually in the air right now. So we are getting pilot reports from the pilot on how smooth their ride is. Maybe they've encountered an area of turbulence. Sometimes we can help them to avoid it by saying, I think it would be better if you went down a little bit lower for the next little while, and they'll actually descend to look for a smoother ride. And so we're also looking at a lot of data, as you can imagine. The pilot reports are one aspect of that data. Another aspect is just comparing various forecast models and seeing which ones are initializing well and are catching on well to the current situation, and then taking that out for the next 18 to 24 hours to help us put together products that ultimately make it onto our operational floor where critical decisions are made based on those forecasts.
So you guys are realistically, you're looking no more than 48 hours, in the long range. Like I will do 7 days, National Weather Service will do 7 to 10. You guys are looking in a much shorter window than what we would be looking at, 24, 48 hours, correct?
For the most part, that's true, especially our operational forecasts. We do one additional product that is a 5-day outlook, and it focuses on our primary hub stations. And that actually looks out to day 5, where we just kind of start flagging. It's a little bit dependent on what city it is, what station. Obviously, Minneapolis or Detroit can deal with an inch of snow a lot easier than a station like New York City or even Atlanta. But that 5-day outlook is critical to start the process of planning and maybe deciding if they're going to have to make changes to the operational schedule or send out notices to the customers about maybe flights are going to be delayed or maybe anything operationally like that.
And you kind of got where I was going to go next. A couple days ago, you remember the enhanced risk 3 out of 5 on the severe weather scale for the Eastern Seaboard, including all of the DC airports and everything going into New York City. And even Atlanta was part of that as well. And from what we've seen in the national headlines recently, one thunderstorm event, at least at Atlanta Hartsfield, throws the whole system in whack. But then you tack it into like the DC area, the New York City airports. How quick can things change, especially in summer weather, when you get rapid thunderstorm development, sometimes severe, but then you're getting the FAA coming in saying, hey, we're stopping it all for a while?
Yeah, it's exactly right. And depending on where the event is in the country, obviously the Northeast is typically has the most operations for a small geographic area. And so any weather inside of that region can create delays or operational problems pretty quickly. Down here in Atlanta, we have a little bit more airspace to work with, where we only have Atlanta Hartsfield as the main airport here. And really the same thing with Detroit, where we're able to maneuver through thunderstorms a little bit better than we can up across the Northeast. There's just a very compact airspace up there that's very susceptible to trouble with weather.
So let's talk about being a meteorologist for a second. What made you want to become an airline meteorologist? Because we know there's all the different facets of the Hurricane Center, the National Weather Service, media, research. What made you want to be a meteorologist for one of the airlines?
So I always had a love of aviation and weather. And when I started looking at careers that I could combine, I actually started in air traffic control and then got a first job offer in meteorology when I was going through that program. So I already had a little bit of a aviation background to kind of launch me into aviation meteorology. And I just love being able to combine my two passions of aviation and meteorology. And your forecast is really making an impact with your customer here. It's most of the customers that we deal with often are in the same room even that we're in. And so it's a little bit different than the media or the National Weather Service, where you don't have quite as much personal interaction, I guess, with your customers. But that's one thing that we do have here. So I love interacting with people and being part of the planning process. It's a lot of fun.
And if you had to leave one message with our viewers, because obviously us being in Detroit, one of the Delta hubs, a lot of people more often not hit the widget into the air. What is one resounding message about weather and traveling in the air that you'd like to leave with our viewers?
So there's a lot of things that can impact the flight schedule. And anytime you're in a weather delay or your plane is delayed en route or anything because of weather, it's always for safety. Safety, safety, safety. We never want to do anything that compromises any type of safety. We always want to keep that first and foremost. So we have all these different plans and procedures in place, and we're constantly looking for ways to adapt to weather situations, because weather's always happening, right? And so we'll do anything that we can to adapt our operation to the weather. But at the end of the day, safety is our main goal.
And I think we appreciate that goal, especially when we're going 30, 35,000 feet and we feel those road bumps in the sky, if you will, thanks to a little bit of turbulence from Mother Nature. Warren Weston,
Yes.
meteorologist for Delta Airlines at their general offices down in Atlanta, one of the many forecasters down there that keep you safe when you're coming in and out of Metro Airport here in Detroit. Warren, thanks so much for joining us today. I love talking about this. I'm an avid flyer myself, so it's really neat to see how our jobs kind of align in some same ways, but then tailoring a little more to when I scan that boarding pass to go across the Atlantic over to Paris or Amsterdam. Warren, thanks so much for joining me today. I really appreciate it.